Tonight, the Mining Guild is suing several news outlets for defamation after referring to their environmental resource extraction systems as world devastators.
And lothcats, puffer pigs, and gizka, cuddly house pets or dangerously invasive species. We'll look into illegal animal smuggling and more. Tonight at 11.
Welcome back, you scruffy-looking nerf herders, to Hoth Topics, a Star Wars podcast. I am your Rebel Commander, Ian, and joining me as always is our Imperial Death Trooper, Jon. Welcome back to the podcast.
Welcome back. I mean, I've been here.
Well, true, but we are collectively back again here with more Star Wars stuff to talk about. A couple podcasts ago, we went over the beginning of Season 4 of Rebels. There was a lot more to talk about than I thought we were going to get to, and we were right. Couldn't fit it all. We're going to go back through and finish up our Season 4 recap of Rebels. It's actually really cool how they dropped the rest of the season in such a short period of time, because that means I don't have to wait every week. I don't know about you.
I thought it was kind of weird. It felt a lot like they're just trying to get the show out of their hair. It kind of felt more like it was for Disney XD more than it was for the audience.
That's an interesting way to look at it.
I'm more cynical when it comes to television, though. So.
Fair enough, but let's not dilly-dally around today, Jon.
Good choice of words.
I enjoyed them as well. We're going to get right into our discussion about Rebels and the last couple episodes of the last season of the show. We left ourselves with talking about the Rebel Assault episode. And in that episode, the very last thing we saw was Kanan rushing towards the city to try to save Hera and being stopped by the wolves. Is there anything else that you think is important to touch on?
I think we should just jump in.
All right, let's do it. Starting off with Jedi Knight. Spoilers ahead.
I know I just advocated jumping in, but I literally did not take notes on this one episode. My notes just say, see Ian's notes. Well, so Ian, what do you got for me?
In your defense, it is a very Force user heavy episode. One of the things I really liked about this episode is it really shows an ideal version of the Jedi, with Kanan admitting straight away that his head's not clear, he's connected to Hera, he cares about her too much, and he lets Ezra take the lead on that. And he straight up tells Ezra, hey, I'm not doing great. I will do what you tell me to do. I need you to be the one with the calm head here. It's a good example of what I think the Jedi could be and should be. A lot of people focus on the Jedi Council as presented in prequels and the Clone Wars as being the only way Jedi are and have been from
Traitors.
Here on. Yeah. No, well, very strict on their rules, I'll say that. But Kanan's kind of taking the Qui-Gon approach to his view of the Force, and his views on love and connections. It's not a bad thing. Emotions aren't a bad thing, but they can become very wild and unpredictable and lead down dark paths if you're not careful with them. And he's taking the necessary precautions by putting things into Ezra's hands without admitting that he shouldn't be involved at all. And I think that's really the ideal way Jedi should act and be. I have many opinions on the way the Jedi are run. I don't know if you picked up on this.
I think that without the oversight of the Jedi Council, without the bureaucracy of it all, Kanan and Ezra, for that part, are able to kind of shine brighter than what the Jedi of the Republic were allowed to do.
Oh, yeah, I completely agree with that. And it's really naive to think that the iteration we saw in the prequels and the Clone Wars, where the Jedi were at their peak and just perfectly placed to fall, and their last ditch efforts are failing because Sidious is able to take advantage of that bureaucracy, that sedentary nature, that lethargic, we're at the top and nobody can topple us sort of thing. It's naive to think the Jedi started out that way and didn't evolve or change over time. It's a story progression thing. And we see different iterations of the Jedi Order with varying different opinions and philosophies throughout both Legends and throughout the current canon. But that's enough jabbering on about Jedi. But more things in this episode. It was really good to see your buddy Thrawn.
He's the best. He's so blue.
He was examining a lot of the art again in this episode, showing off his collection to the detriment of Hera, who is still captured. But not for long. Hera is rescued by Kanan and Ezra in a plan that involves gliders, which kind of brought me back to Return of the Jedi, sort of low-tech Ewok tactics. Eventually, everybody gets out of Imperial-controlled dome area. They hijack ships, and security catches on. The Imperials are after them. Governor Price makes some interesting decisions about what she will destroy in an effort to stop the rebels from escaping. One of those things is the entire Imperial fuel depot.
Oops. Pretty big oops. Or worth it.
Well, she might think it's worth it because Kanan dies. He straight up dies in this episode. He stops the explosion from the fuel tanks from blowing up his team and prevents them from trying to save him. And he straight up blows up. And you know what? It was actually a pretty good death, I think, in terms of the way Star Wars deaths go. It was a noble sacrifice, and they still, even though they lost Kanan, they still got a win by the destruction of the fuel depot, which renders the entire TIE Defender factory pretty much helpless. John, what are your opinions on the blowing up of the Imperial fuel depot and the opinions of the governor?
I think most people in the fandom knew that at some point something was going to have to happen to Kanan.
Yeah, I agree.
And I think, at least between you and me and a handful of our friends, we all agreed that the best way for him to go would be to sacrifice himself for the others, which is what he did. I didn't really have any notes on this episode because I like the episode so much. I thought they did his death very artistically, Thrawn. But also, on the other side of being a loyal Imperial citizen, I'm all about Jedis dying. So, good story and good moral victory for the loyal citizens of Lothal.
Putting aside your ridiculous loyalties, I agree with you. There definitely needed to be a way to get Kanan out of the series, and I think they did a really good job. They gave him a good death. He was a good character. He was enjoyable to watch, and I think he went out the way that he should have.
So Governor Price purposefully.
Did you just correct yourself to give her the correct title? Are you afraid?
Well, yeah. You never know. No, I legitimately forgot what her civilian rank was. But she doesn't hesitate to shoot the fuel depot, not because of incompetence on her part, but I think to her the price of killing a Jedi is worth all the fuel in the city there. She could have thought that destroying that fuel tank was worth destroying something that, from stories, is superhuman.
Well, that putting that kind of lens on it, I think does show a little bit of intelligence and strategy on her part. Right up until we get to the next episode of Doom, where she makes another very interesting decision that I want to get your opinion on.
Absolutely.
So Governor Price has, for good or ill, blown up the fuel depot, which is running the whole TIE Defender factory, shuts it down, and she knows she's going to get in trouble for this. She knows that people above her are going to be upset. So her plan is to throw a parade in order to mask the fact that she screwed up.
I think it's a parade to celebrate the death of a Jedi.
Well, that's fair enough, but she specifically says something about, oh, this'll buy me some time or get me out of trouble or something along those lines. And Thrawn immediately sees through it and chews her out. And essentially tells her, I'm going to go talk to the Emperor. If you don't have this mess sorted out by the time I get back, well, hate to tell you, but I'm going to have your head on a stick. Essentially. And that's pretty understandable, I think. What I don't understand is why she thought a military parade was going to buy her some time. Thoughts?
She's not a good governor.
All right. She's not a good governor. I'm glad to hear some criticism out of you. I thought you were just a pure Imperial loyalist through and through. But I'm glad you can... I mean,
she's just a civilian.
Well, technically so is Tarkin.
True. He is. He is a governor.
He's a Grand Moff. So he's like head governor. But regardless, Price has her work cut out for her because she doesn't want to end up as Thrawn's chew toy going into the future. On the other side of the world, however, we get some time with seeing our ghost team after Kanan's death, and one thing I really liked was Ezra didn't seem to be as emotional about it as I thought he was going to be. We've seen him in the past be very angry and quick to be upset when things don't go well. But I think part of him really understood that what Kanan was doing was the only way it could have gone, and that he was a little bit more accepting of it. You could tell he was still hurting and he was still upset, but he was a lot more Jedi about it, I guess is what I'm trying to say. Whereas Hera kind of goes through the classic blame myself for the loss of the person shtick.
Survivor's guilt.
Survivor's guilt, sure. And it's a valid thing, but I think it's overdone in Star Wars a little bit. We see it in every iteration wherever somebody dies. I guess maybe because it's just a common theme? What do you think?
Well, maybe if they just, followed the law, their friends wouldn't die. Wouldn't have this problem. I think a lot of the stories in Star Wars, like you said, I think they're driven by that loss. Anakin with his mother, Luke with his family, Rey with her family.
I think with Rey it was more connecting with Han Solo and then losing Han Solo and
adoptive family.
Yeah.
And it seems like a lot of the stories involve that loss and the characters rising above it and being strong enough to get through it to kind of continue what the person they lost was doing. If that makes sense.
Okay, fair enough. Now, do you think, though, that we could have maybe explore some other reactions to loss that we haven't really seen in Star Wars yet? I can't really think of a good example, but...
Well, I mean, the other extreme would be anger, which...
we've also seen that.
Yeah, we've seen Anakin slaughter not just the men, but the women and children, too. But
yeah.
They were animals.
No.
Well, they were slaughtered like animals.
All I can hear in my head right now is, I hate sand.
That's unfortunate.
Yeah, and it's your fault. But speaking of how they deal with loss, Ezra's dealing with this loss. The entire team's dealing with the loss of Kanan. I didn't quite like the way Zeb and Sabine reacted immediately. They kind of came full circle on their Bizarro plan, but at first it seemed like they were just going to try to charge head in and cause as much damage to the Empire as possible.
Yeah, that's kind of like the Anakin way of retaliating.
Right.
Though they're slightly more tactile about it.
Right.
Slightly.
Yeah, but it would have fed right into what Thrawn pretty much said, that they're going to react to this and they're going to be upset with this and use that to your advantage. And they do for a little bit, but they kind of come full circle on that, so I wasn't too upset with how that was handled. But we do see a good setup here where Ezra, in his grief, is confronted by the Loth Wolves, and the biggest of the Loth Wolves we've seen, huge Loth Wolf named Doom, appears in, I'm gonna say, a Force vision, because we don't see Doom for the rest of the season. He only appears in this one specific point in time, and Ezra snaps out of whatever it is he's seeing at the end of it. But he meets Doom, who pretty much berates him for being scared, in a kind of looping back into that master apprentice thing. It's like, why are you upset? Why are you running? You know, you need to focus and get the job done and set out what you said you were going to do, and that's save Lothal. And they deliver a tablet to him, which sets up some things in the following episodes where they have to go to the Jedi Temple on Lothal and investigate some things. But I, being, the Force lover that I am, I did like this. I've liked the Loth Wolves for the most part up to this point. I had some issues with the whole warp travel thing. That's going to feed into some other issues I have, but I wanted to get your take on this very
Was the warp travel in this episode or the next one?
The warp travel was episodes prior. That's how they got to... Oh, wait, maybe it isn't. I think they do the warp travel...
Well, they do the warp tunnel before this.
Right, correct, and that's what I'm talking about.
Oh, okay.
That's what I'm talking about. But what did you think of Doom the Wolf?
Like as you mentioned, I'm not the biggest Forcey Warsy guy of Star Wars.
That's my official title, by the way.
Forcey Warsy?
Yes, I am the Forcey Warsy guy of the Hoth Topics podcast.
Gotcha. Yeah. We will fix that in post. I since I don't have as deep as a connection, you could say, with the lore of the Force, I'm a little bit more forgiving on what Force powers can do, or what the Force has the ability to do through things. I think it's because I accept that it is a fantasy setting that just happens to also be in space, and kind of compare it to other fantasy settings of the same thing.
See, that's kind of interesting, because you're not a Force guy, but that same viewpoint and argument I've heard used by people who are super on the other side of that, where they're just hardcore Force fans, and they have that same idea of, well, it's a fantasy in a sci-fi, so things are a lot more malleable. You can get away with a lot more using the Force. So that's kind of interesting that's elements of that are on both sides of the spectrum there.
And I watch a lot of other sci-fi shows, and when they do things that are supernatural or Force-like, it always seems out of place, but Star Wars is always compackaged with both. So it's not as hard of a leap for me to believe that these apparent seemingly wild animals have the ability to travel through hyperspace through a planet just as easily as I can believe that a starship exists.
Okay, that's fair enough. So that's actually going to set up some interesting counterpoints, I think, to what we have going into these last couple episodes, starting with Wolves at the Door.
And with this episode, we got to dive into 2 episodes of things that I like to think about as things that will make Ian squirm. And as you should know by now, Ian has opinions about the Force.
I do. It's true. And just quick disclaimer, I know my opinions are not everybody's opinions, okay? I'm not going to hate you if you disagree with me. It's perfectly acceptable to do that.
One thing I like that they show in this episode, or continue to show, is Ezra's affinity for animals and their affinity for him. How he's able to just kind of reach out in the Force to call wildlife to him, which they need in this particular episode to get them to the Jedi Temple on Lothal.
Using what?
I believe that Sabine installed hyperdrives into these dogs. Does that make sense?
It might as well have been. That's unfair to say, but yeah, we get the warp thing again with the wolves being able to cross over the planet seemingly just through the power of being magic force wolves, which again, it goes a little too far overboard for me. I like limits on my force powers, and that's a little far out of my comfort zone.
I just realized as we were talking why it doesn't bother me as much, and it has to deal with one of the Ewok adventure movies and a child being trapped underwater by magic water. And I was able to accept that as a child, so I'm able to accept hyperspace or dimensional shifting wolves.
You know, that's a fair point, because I didn't see those movies as a kid. In fact, I first saw them like 6 months ago. 4 months ago? 3 months ago. Some time ago.
Star Wars.
Yeah.
Well, so they ride these wolves through the interdimensionals to get to the Jedi Temple on Lothal, and when they get there, it's already being excavated and researched by Imperial forces.
And that's something that's super cool to see. I like to see that the Emperor, via this task force, is interested in the Jedi Temple and interested in Jedi artifacts, and it's one of the first examples we really see what we've already known from other sources, that the Emperor is collecting Jedi relics and Force relics and investigating Force sites just to complete his weird collections and gain more power.
I think it's one of the few things that the Jedi Order and the Sith have in common is that they are very knowledge-driven religions, factions. I'm not quite sure what the exact terminology would be.
I'm going to go with philosophies.
There you go. Philosophies. The Jedi Temple has a huge library.
Mm-hmm. But on the point of the artifact collecting, we actually get a little glimpse of the Emperor's collection in the Lando comic, where we kind of see he has a yacht full of Sith relics just lying about. And we know that as the audience, but Lando doesn't. So that's a fun read. But maybe some of the artifacts that he got in that comic came from Lothal. From this dig. Could be possible.
You have to check the timeline.
Yeah, it's true. Check the timeline.
I'll fix it in post.
Don't make that joke again.
I won't. I will. I'm absolutely going to, since I'm editing most of the time. So when Ezra and Sabine get there, they see all this digging going on and looks like artifact cataloging going on. I'm 90% sure I saw somebody holding an old lightsaber.
I didn't catch that.
I could completely. It could have just been some cylinder a Rhodian was working with. So they're wondering what the Empire's doing there.
Yeah, we know whatever it is they're looking for is connected to the tablet that Dune gives to Ezra in the previous episode, and the tablet itself has 3 different hand gestures on it, in a outstretched hand, a open-palmed, upward-facing hand, and a fist. And the Empire eventually ends up catching Sabine, not quite knowing who she was in the beginning, but take her to the lead person in charge of this dig site, who happens to be a minister who pretty much works directly for Palpatine. And it was kind of cool to see his character in this, because he treats Sabine really well for someone who's a prisoner and appreciates her input on the art.
Addresses her by her clan title, almost.
Right. as Lady Ren. That acts as a...
See, they're not all bad, Ian. They're not all bad.
Hey, I never said they were all bad. Just the ones who, commit genocide and murder.
Right.
They blew up a planet, John. They blew up a planet.
Not
but in
yet.
this case...
They haven't yet.
They haven't yet. That's not a good excuse. But in this case, they are searching for another alternate form of power, which Ezra and Sabine and the Minister figure out kind of on their own separately is a door to somewhere, a Force door.
It is referred to as the world between worlds.
The way they kind of figure this out is the hand gestures match a mural that is excavated from the Jedi Temple, and the mural shows the quote-unquote Mortis gods from the Clone Wars. And I have some opinions on them, but you had an interesting thought that I liked, where you were mentioning the Minister and Sabine, two people who really don't know anything about Force stuff, were the ones explaining.
Oh,
it's
yeah,
the audience.
yeah. So while Ezra is studying this, like the actual painting, Sabine and the Minister are having a discussion about what or who these characters are that are being represented in these images. That being of the daughter who is the light side, the father who is in between, and the son who is the dark side. And I just thought it was funny that you had these two non-Force users kind of giving an exposition, or not giving an exposition, but expositioning that why they were important to people who maybe didn't watch the Clone Wars, or who were like me and tuned out during that episode, even though I realized that a lot of people, the Mortis arc is their favorite arc of the Clone Wars.
Oh, great. Good to know I'm going to be pissing people off.
Oh, yeah. People love Mortis. But as mentioned many times, I'm not the biggest for. I just want to see clones shoot things.
I did really like, though, that point that you made. It was kind of interesting that the non-Forces were the ones explaining what is essentially about the heaviest Forcey crap you can talk about.
Well, and I did like that Sabine's art background actually came into some practical use besides just graffitiing and randomly painting things or explaining her influences to her father. The Minister sought her out because he knew about her artistic ways,
right?
And kind of played to that to help her, to get her to help him figure out this door, or the puzzle to the door.
And Ezra eventually unlocks the puzzle to the door. He uses the Force in the correct sequence to open the door, matching corresponding hand movements with triggers. It's all explained rather thoroughly. There's not a lot left to the imagination afterwards, but again, it's all because of the audience it's geared toward, I think. On the topic of the Mortis gods, because they aren't too heavily overused here, which I like, but I don't... This is where the opinions come in. I don't like them being referred to as gods. They themselves don't refer to themselves as gods, but my main problem with it is that the Force for me has always been how Obi-Wan explains it in A New Hope. The Force is an energy field. It surrounds us, it penetrates us, it binds the galaxy together. That has always been a good enough explanation for me, and I feel like the Mortis gods are an attempt to over-explain the Force in the fantasy direction, where there are these embodied sort of concepts that are anthropomorphized in the Father, the Son, and the Daughter. And I think that really takes away from the core of the Force. I liked it kind of being a mysterious non-entity that we can explore through the different philosophies in Star Wars. It means that no one person is really right. No one group or philosophy is right. No one group or philosophy is wrong. And I think that putting the anthropomorphized versions on it kind of gives it more of a moral bend where there is a good, there is a bad. And I think it's just a way to over-explain it towards fantasy the same way that the Metachlorians were a way to try to over-explain it through the science fiction sense. And I know that's not a popular opinion. I'd rather they keep the Force undefined.
Okay.
Or less defined, I guess. See, if it was less defined, I think I'd be more okay with, the warp wolves and going forward into this next episode, some of the things that we see there. But knowing that there's kind of a more moral aspect behind it, I don't know. So, there's a little rant about the Mortis gods for you. But in all fairness, they weren't overused, and none of them actually make a full-on appearance here. They're just symbols on the wall. Which
was a really cool looking door.
It was. It was
two-dimensional, but it moved. But
I really liked that.
Yeah.
That was really cool. I do agree. Whether or not you agree with my point on it should be or it shouldn't be, it was still a cool visual. And the visual leads Ezra to the door. The door's triggered. The door opens. And we move on to the next episode.
The door just being a moving circle of wolves on a rock face.
Correct.
That he can jump through.
Yes, that only Ezra seems to be able to jump through. We see him jump through at the very end of the episode, and 2 Death Troopers try to follow him. Or are they just Stormtroopers? 2 troopers try to follow him, and they bonk their heads right on rock wall.
Unfortunately.
They got the buckets on their head. They're fine.
Ah, you're right.
But that leads us into our next episode, which is The World Between Worlds.
Now, when we do our reviews, Ian and I will watch these videos, or watch the show when we have the time, and we don't usually watch them together for our initial viewing, and we'll watch them together and compare notes before we do the podcast. When this episode opened up, the only note that I was able to write down was, oh boy, because I could not wait to hear what Ian had to say about this. That being said, almost all my notes for this episode are jokes for me, because nothing that I write down will be able to become even close to the fiery sun, which will be Ian's opinions on what has been introduced to the Star Wars universe.
Look. I'm not trying to tell anybody that their opinions on Star Wars, their view of Star Wars is wrong. I'm not trying to do that. But there are some things that have happened in this episode that I do not like, and I don't think belong in Star Wars as we know it. So...
yeah, let me paint a picture of the episode for you. Ezra makes it through the door.
Right.
And where he ends up is what is referred to as the world between worlds.
And admittedly, it's a pretty cool designed place.
Oh, I thoroughly enjoy the design of the place. It is a starfield with almost white translucent walkways that kind of create geometrical shapes, circles and rectangles and triangles and other things that you would commonly call shapes.
Those are all shapes. You are correct.
My brain stopped midway through that sentence. If you've ever played Mario Kart and have enjoyed the monotony of Rainbow Road, imagine that, but with no color.
I believe, I've heard that joke actually been going around.
Oh, really?
Yeah, people have referred to it as...
I'm not original.
People have referred to it as an unfinished Mario Kart track.
This is why I can no longer listen to podcasts before we record, because I don't want things influencing me.
Hey, it just means you have ideas that are similar to people who are more successful than us.
Very, very fair.
Going back to the unfinished Mario Kart land, however.
throughout this world between worlds on all these pathways are these shapes that I mentioned, and each of these shapes have a doorway in them that appear to lead to other times and other places. So, Ian.
Yeah.
Let's say that these doors that can see into time and space, wibbly wobbly type of stuff, goes ding. How would you feel if Ezra used these portals to affect things that have happened in the past?
Look, I probably would have been fine if the whole world between worlds was just an area where you could see into the past and into the future. Because, time travel, you see to the future's malleable, it can change the outcomes. We've seen that before. We've seen that in Force visions. We see that people can see things and change the outcome of the future. That's okay. What we have not seen before, and this is where the problem lies for me, is somebody reaching through time and pulling somebody through time that removes them from their fate. Now, I have an unpopular opinion about Ahsoka Tano. This does not mean I do not like the character of Ahsoka Tano. I loved Ahsoka Tano in the Clone Wars. I liked her character and her character development in Rebels. I haven't read her book yet. I'm sure it's great. I'm gonna pick it up. But I thought that her dying, or supposedly dying, at the hands of Vader was a great, hard-hitting moment. I thought that it was poetic and great and moving to see that Vader is so far gone that he killed his Padawan. Now, we don't see it happen on screen, and as you've pointed out, I must have blocked it from my mind entirely. We do see Ahsoka at the very end of that episode in season 2? End of season 2?
Sounds right.
Where she is seen heading back into the temple, the dark side temple, where she was supposedly dying at the hands of Vader. I just think that pulling her out renders that entire sequence meaningless. All those great opportunities to have an emotional and impactful death and scene that really served to help motivate Ezra and take him on the path that he went through in season 3 of Rebels. It killed it for me. And she doesn't do anything. Like, there's no purpose to her returning that I can see. And I'll get more into that in a later episode. But, look, I have an issue with time travel in general, as you know. I think that time travel works well in series where they have a clear, defined sort of rule set on time travel, and that it's an integral part of the series. You made a Doctor Who quote a second ago, and I think that's a great example of a series that does it right. They have a loose set of rules, and their entire shtick is about time travel, and that's the whole point of the story. When you introduce an element like time travel into a property like Star Wars, and my problem with time travel as a whole is when you introduce it into anything where it hasn't been a key element the entire time, you open up the door for lazy writing, for the ability to quote-unquote correct mistakes, bring back characters, undo work that people have put into the universe. Like, what's to stop Palpatine from gaining access to this place, going through time, murderizing Luke Skywalker, and completely changing Star Wars entirely.
I think that's the whole point of the place.
I know.
That's what Palpatine was trying to do.
I know, and it's I don't like it. It opens up too many doors for bad things. Yeah. Is that good? Is that satisfied enough? You got me to dish out all my unpopular opinions on time travel and Ahsoka. Was there anything else we needed to cover in this episode?
I don't know. I personally felt that was very therapeutic. Do you feel better, Ian?
No, because I know what's coming now that it's out there.
Well, one thing I did want to quickly mention about the time travel thing is that I'm actually very surprised that Star Wars has gone 40 years without introducing it. Most science fiction franchises have a time travel aspect, completely not counting Doctor Who, since it is the aspect of the show. Star Trek, for example, has many time travel episodes, and not to get too off track, but the Federation does have an entire department dedicated to temporal investigations. Look, I thought it was interesting that they chose to bring it into Star Wars in this way.
Well, and that's not to say, like, it could certainly open up possibilities for great storylines. I'm sure that they're going to come up with a comic or a book or something in the future where they're going to use it, and I'm going to go, wow, that's a really good example of how to do this. Like, that's great. But the problem is, with that door, you're opening Pandora's box, you know. All the good and the bad is coming out there.
Right.
You open up too many, you know, and because Star Wars is so interconnected, everything is connected. It's not like a lot of these other universes out there where they've got kind of separate things and not everything counts towards the canon. Everything in Star Wars is linked together, and that just but yeah, to your point, it's gone a long time without introducing an element that most other sci-fis have.
To continue on with what goes on in the episode, Ezra pulls Snips out. I think at this point he realizes what this place is and goes off to find Kanan.
Yep.
Kanan's death. For me, I really, really like this part. Ezra sees Kanan in his final moments, and wants to pull his master back. But Snips is kind of the call for thinking here.
The voice of reason.
Thank you. That's the other words that I wanted to put
call
together.
For thinking.
Yeah, call for thinking. Voice of reason.
I
Same
call for
thing.
thinking.
To say, hey, if you he sacrificed himself saving you. If you pull him out, your friends die. And I guess he would die, and then he wouldn't be there. But that's the whole time travel paradox that Ian hates. And in the end, he chooses to let Kanan sacrifice himself.
It's interesting.
And in that way, you know, is able to let go of his master.
Right.
Which was my takeaway from it, because I wasn't so filled with rage at time travel being introduced to Star Wars that I could see that.
It's a fair point, and it's interesting to see the parallels between Ezra and Anakin being shown here, where Anakin had this intense desire to save Padme, to change fate, to change his future. The only difference here being Ezra actually has the means to do it. He still chooses not to, which, you know, even though I don't like the time travel thing, you're right, it was a good moment. And then after he chooses that, we get a surprise visitor.
Oh, could it be?
It is.
In all of his regal glory?
All of it. All of his regal, wrinkly, cackling glory.
Green glow glory. Uncle Pappy shows up.
Uncle Pappy.
Excuse me. You might know him as Emperor Palpatine, our dear leader.
Dear leader.
He calls out to Ezra through his own portal, where he is standing on the other side of a portal amidst a table of green flame what did you call it, Ian? His Sith magics?
Sith sorcery, yeah.
From where he is, he's able to see Ezra and uses the fire to try to get Ezra to come to him, to bait him to come to him. However, Ezra, with the help of Snips, is able to escape the clutches of fire, I guess.
Yeah.
Because the fire also had tentacles.
Well, it was fire that could grab people.
Yeah, it's not fire I want to mess with.
Dark side powers, everybody. So, riddle me this. How was Palpatine able to even look through a doorway and get something through it?
My personal theory, I don't know if this is confirmed yet, but I think that Palpatine is able to see into this world. I think that he needed Ezra or somebody with a Force sensitivity to actually be able to open the door into the world beyond worlds that would finally allow him access to it.
Okay.
Kind of like a vault that as soon as one door is opened, all the doors open. That's a terrible vault design, by the way, so don't use my analogy to build anything. That's what I got from it, is that there's something, some sort of Force power probably that is blocking him from being able to fully manifest inside this realm.
Basically, he needs somebody on the other side of the door to let him in.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, you know what? That's fair enough. I buy that.
Palpatine is a vampire. Which means he will live forever.
Well,
in his benevolent glory.
Benevolent glory? No. Opposite of that. Malevolent glory, at best. But that's fair enough. I can see that. And one thing I do like is that, he's kind of doing the mumbling over the fire and manipulating things like that. And I enjoy that because it reinforces something that I argued a lot back in Star Wars Rebels, is that magic is just another form of Force use, which this kind of reinforces that idea of Sith sorcery and mumbling and magic, and the whole kind of super fantasy aspect is just another use of Force powers. That's something that I think, if I recall correctly, it was Mace Windu confronted Mother Talzin about back in Clone Wars.
On her magics.
All of her magics, and he just yelled at her, "You're just using the Force weird." So we got a little bit of an example on that. Eventually, Ezra and Ahsoka escape, each going back through the respective portals they came from. Mm-hmm. Oh, by the way, this entire time they're being helped out by a Force Owl, which is supposedly a avatar of, or a harbinger or servant of the sister.
It's an owl that throughout the series has shown up anytime Snips is near. Right,
so there's a kind of a connection there. Apparently the sister's been watching Ahsoka, which, see previous comments on the Mortis Gods.
But that's only if you believe that it's an avatar of the daughter.
That's fair. I mean, it was explained as such in the episode.
Did get stabbed by her brother to dead.
Well, they're Force gods. Who knows if they're dead or not dead? Anyway, I'm not gonna. I have plenty of other things to groan about. So, at the end of the day, they're able to get out of the temple. Ahsoka goes back through her portal to her time. Ezra goes back through his portal, and the temple itself has disappeared. Cool, I guess. It just, it's the cherry on top of the super large amount of Force stuff. Maybe it, ate itself, through the portal and turned inside out or something. I don't know. But that brings us to the last technically 3 episodes, but they were all aired at the same time. The last chunks of Star Wars Rebels, starting with A Fool's Hope. Contrary to what you might have thought from the last couple minutes of discussion, I like Star Wars, and I actually really like this episode. We start off with a lot of C and B team people, my favorite of which is the clones. Seeing the clones again was really cool. And they had a fan favorite of yours tagging along with them this time, Hondo.
Hondo made it hard for me to write notes on this episode because Hondo was in it, and he's the best.
He is the best. Most of the episode is just setting up the finale where they are putting together their plan and enacting their plan, and part of this plan involves capturing Governor Price. Most of the episode is battle, which I thought was actually really cool. It's not something that we see a lot of in Rebels compared to, say, the Clone Wars, where we had lots of just episodes that were pure battle. Rebels has it too, but this one in particular, it was just one big battle between the Imperials and the Lothal rebel forces, and it was pretty cool. I liked Hondo's plan, getting them onto the planet using the hyperspace lanes.
Oh yeah, that's something that I'm not sure if really has been touched on since the EU wipe. Is the existence of hyperspace lanes,
right?
Which are just the big galactic freeways. One of those things that everyone asks, why didn't the rebels on Hoth evacuate in any other direction,
right,
off the planet? Well, the answer is hyperspace lanes, the only charted, safe places to go.
Which is why blockades work if you're just hovering over a section of a planet, really. So that was pretty cool. I like how he snuck them in. The episode has a point where it looks like maybe Ryder is going to betray the rebels to the Empire.
And I think both you and I saw right through this.
Yeah, I didn't believe it for a second. I think I wrote down in my notes, prediction, this will all turn out to be part of the plan. And then, 2 notes later, immediately proved my prediction correct. So, they have Governor Price, and more importantly, they have her knowledge, which includes access codes and ways to get in and out of the capital city, where we set up the finale, which was a massive 2-part episode called Family Reunion and Farewell. One of the quotes that I really liked from this episode, I think sums it up really well. It's when Rex says, "When it comes to Jedi, the worse the plan, the better the result." And I gotta tell you, that's both very apt and not very comforting. I hope it's not used as an excuse in future adventures.
I thought you were going to say future episodes, and I got news for you.
I almost did. I caught myself. On the topic of the plan, as far as I understood it, the plan was to recall all the Imperial personnel to the Dome, which apparently can fly, and they achieved this by utilizing some of Governor Price's codes, which they coax out of her by intimidating her with a Force Wolf.
Pretty Jedi-like. Terrorist tactics using fear.
Well, I can't give you a lot of crap for that statement because their plan involves launching the Dome, which now has all the recalled troops in it, into the sky, and then blowing it up.
And murdering them, yeah.
That kind of takes the good out of good guy, and it's very Saw Gerrera-like.
Very, very just guy.
Very, very guy. I'm not entirely sure how I feel about that plan. I mean, we see them take down Star Destroyers all the time, and those are crewed by a lot of people. It's just not something I want to think about too hard.
It's okay. I'll think about it and remember them for you.
Yeah, and you will fill me in. Thrawn immediately sees through their whole plan and counters it by having Rook disable the shield generator for the city and threatening to fire on all the civilians. I really hate to say this, but the Rebels' plan is almost as evil and terrible as Thrawn's reaction to their plan.
Yeah, so early in the episode they give their plan, but they don't give the whole plan. What they say is they're going to recall all the troops and the forces on Lethal's capital city, trap them in the dome, and then launch the dome, and then the Imperials would be gone and never come back. It's not until this point where Thrawn shows up that they do mention that the plan is to blow up all of the Imperial forces inside the dome, which, as Ian mentioned, Thrawn makes a pretty good point about that. Instead of bringing and imprisoning all the Imperial forces, all the rebels have really done is bring them to a safe location to where a orbital bombardment will mean that there will be no Imperial casualties. Good on you, Phoenix Squad.
Once they start enacting a counter plan, Zeb has a great comment about being trapped in a dome with a bunch of stormtroopers that they trapped inside. It's pretty great. With Thrawn's threat, to me, that really shows that he's so fed up with the Lothal rebels that he's just willing to full-on bombard the city.
Honestly, it's something I'm surprised that hadn't happened already. I mean, any Imperial governor would have no problem making an example of a city way before things had escalated to the point that they had in Rebels, which kind of goes to show that Thrawn is a different kind of Imperial officer.
Right, he'd rather prevent as much damage as possible before having to resort to such
I think it's more that he wants to just use less
brutal.
Yeah, thank you. Less brutal, kind of sweeping, generic actions.
Right.
Pinpoint accuracy stuff. Because, Thrawn is so blue and smart.
All of that.
Blue.
All of that is true. He also manages to convince Ezra to surrender himself. Ezra sneaks away by himself after having a little moment with Sabine that I like. Their eyes meeting and the whole "you know what I have to do" look. She distracts the rest of the team long enough for him to surrender himself to Thrawn, who immediately brings him into a very large, I'm gonna say, cargo hold.
Well, real quick, I don't know if you had noticed this when we were rewatching it.
Mm-hmm.
Did you notice when Ezra gave Chopper his lightsaber?
When Ezra gave Chopper his lightsaber. I didn't notice it, but I kind of connected that
at the end.
He did, because Chopper hands it to Sabine.
Yeah. To me, that kind of showed. Well, just before he leaves, the option is either he surrenders or the city is destroyed.
Right.
He almost immediately surrenders. He's there to save his planet, his people. He doesn't want to put them at risk. Hera tries to convince him that there's another way. And as they're planning that, that's when Ezra's able to sneak away. But I think him handing his lightsaber to Chopper to hold on to, it was kind of him like sealing the deal almost.
Mm-hmm.
Like he knows what's probably going to happen, and he kind of gives his last bit of Jedi warrior away.
Okay, yeah, cool. So it subtle hint.
Yeah.
Towards him having a bigger plan.
And I mean, it's super subtle. The first time I watched it, I didn't see it. I didn't see the trade-off.
Yeah, I didn't see it either. So
and maybe it didn't actually happen, and I'm just fan servicing this in.
Well, it could be possible, but no, that makes sense.
I ship Chopper and Ezra's lightsaber.
That is, don't give internet people ideas. They're gonna Rule 34 that nonsense. That's definitely a part you can cut out. Moving on.
I'm not.
Oh, please do.
So they get to Thrawn's ship.
Right.
Thrawn brings him to... Thrawn has a little back and forth with him about how Ezra has done the Jedi thing, the predictable Jedi thing, the noble thing. Thrawn takes him to someone that can teach him other ways, which, as Ian said, appears to be a large cargo hold containing the ruins of at least part of the Lothal Jedi Temple, and a surprise visit from a hologram of your friend and mine, Uncle Pappy. But before we get into discussion on that, something I noticed was how I was surprised at how inefficiently Star Destroyers must be designed to have a room large enough to hold part of a Jedi temple.
I mean, some of them have holds large enough to fit AT-ATs.
Yeah, but this one had a Jedi temple in it.
It was like a chunk.
Knowing Thrawn, that probably could have been an AT-AT or, Walker repair bay that he was like, I'm going to store art in here and there ain't nothing you can do about it.
So I just had an interesting thought. It's not in our notes. Thrawn obviously has some study behind the Jedi, but we know from the Thrawn book that he kind of comes into service after the Empire has purged most of the Jedi from the galaxy. So everything he knows about the Jedi had to have come from the Emperor.
Right.
Which is interesting considering he touts that you're doing the predictable Jedi thing, even though his own viewpoint of the Jedi can only really be viewed through the lens of Palpatine.
Well, I'm sure that he had access at some point, given his rank, to after action reports from the Clone Wars.
Okay, yeah, that's fair enough.
They may have been heavily edited.
Right.
But and because of his obsession with learning art and the cultures, I'm sure he picked up, old wives' tales sort of things, legends that were passed down.
Right. So, Uncle Pappy and Ezra are in...
And it's not the Uncle Pappy that causes the fear throughout the galaxy. It's the loving Uncle Pappy from how he appeared before the Jedi treason, which I thought was great to show a kinder face to Ezra to help convince him or manipulate, as some would say,
right,
into helping him with his evil sheems.
His evil sheems.
Yeah, sheaves.
His evil sheaves. Sheev Palpatine.
I'm also keeping that one in.
Oh, God. He's got this chunk of Jedi Temple, which serves as another doorway to this in-between place where Palpatine is I don't know if he truly was able to open a vision of a door to Ezra's parents, or if that was just manipulative Sith stuff. But one way or another, we see Ezra confronted with the life he could have had with his parents being alive, and Palpatine coaxing him into opening the doorway, knowing that this is something that Ezra really wants. And regardless of my strong, admittedly negative opinions of the time travel, I thought it was a really good moment that Palpatine had with Ezra, trying to use him and manipulate him into opening the doorway for his, own ulterior motives. I thought that was very classic Sith, very classic Palpatine.
However, Palpatine's plan doesn't work, and
Nope.
Ezra, like with the image of Kanan in the previous episodes, decides that the way the future is, or the present is the way it needs to be, and is able to let go of his parents for the greater good, I guess.
Yeah, correct.
And and he destroys what's left of the temple and the portal.
Hopefully, with the
which
destruction of the temple, that's the last we see of the time travel
I
nonsense.
I enjoyed this part as Palpatine's hologram began to glitch into the dark robe had covered Palpatine as Ezra brought the temple down.
Well, of course, with Ezra doing the exact opposite of what he wanted, Palpatine orders Ezra killed. Ezra resists.
So it's treason then.
Yes. Ezra resists and manages to fight off the royal guards. Nice touch. And stormtroopers sent to kill him.
Real quick, is this the first time that the type of weapons they used have been seen in canon or in the games that you know? So they wielded force pike like weapons.
Right. They look
but
like force pikes.
They emitted sort of a
Anti-gravity.
what were those force fields called in Clone Wars? Anakin and Obi-Wan got
The
trapped in them.
stasis field
Yeah.
generators? Yeah.
And basically it neutralized Ezra completely.
His movement, yeah.
But he had the force, so he was
Right.
able to get out of that.
Yeah, I'm not sure if those weapons that... Because the guards that we see, the royal guards, are a little bit different than their appearance in some other media, so I'm not sure if they're supposed to be wielding the same weapon.
Well, I think it depends on the media. Some royal guards, if you take their cloak off, they're wearing armor.
Right.
And then some aren't. Could just be another breed.
Well, as we all like different Imperial style options for armor and stuff, it's going to make the cosplay community very happy to see that they have more options.
While the stuff with the Emperor is happening, the rest of the Phoenix Squad is running around trying to get the shield generator back up to completely thwart Thrawn's plan of bombarding the town.
Yeah, it's cool to see the fire teams going off into the depths trying to get this thing back up and running. It's my favorite cliche. It's the team up cliche, the Avengers assemble cliche, but it's my favorite thing ever. I like seeing characters from different mini stories teaming up at the end to really kick it to the big bad.
While they're fighting, trying to get the shield generator back up, we get unfortunately our first one of the main character death, but named character deaths. A faceless, nameless Imperial naval officer or commando takes a well-aimed shot at poor old Gregor.
Oh, crazy Gregor. He was my favorite,
crazy clone.
Tiny character. He didn't have a huge impact, but just a clone who's old and lost his mind. It was just fantastic. And he went out like a hero. And it was pretty cool to see.
After a long firefight and one serious death and one fake death, the teams are able to get the shield generator back on.
Do you count Zeb's taking out of Rook as a death?
Not as part of the rebel team's death.
Oh, okay,
no.
I see what you're doing. Gotcha. He died, by the way.
Oh, good old Rook. He got shield generated to death. Just like any good high action drama show, they are able to get the shield up just in time for the orbital bombardment to not do any damage.
Well, the issue therein was there was still a massive fleet of Thrawn ships in the sky, but Ezra had a backup plan in case things went awry.
Oh, what was that plan, Ian?
Well, he sent his buddy up in the Ghost to send out a signal on a channel nobody uses, and that signal brought the space whales, John.
The Purgle?
The Purgle.
From back way in episode something, in season something?
Earlier in the... Yeah, I gotta tell ya, I'm not sold on whether I liked or didn't like them, but I can tell you, I did not expect them. I was completely... Wow. Force whales.
So I really, really enjoyed this. And it all has to do with, throughout the series, Ezra being shown to have an animal affinity. And the show is about Ezra when you really get down to it.
True.
And to be able to take that ridiculous thing that he can do with these animals and summon them to just take out an orbiting fleet and the fleet that is also in atmosphere. I don't know, something about squishy space whales slamming their heads into Star Destroyers and tearing them apart. It filled me with joy.
You know what? You've sold me on the concept. I'm for the space whales.
If you don't think about it as Star Wars has to be realistic, and think about it as we can finally let go of reality for this scene, it makes it even better.
All right. Yep. Okay. I'm on board. Not on board with Team Time Travel, but I'm on board with Team Space Whales. So there was a very interesting thing about the Space Whales' involvement, because they end up coming right at Thrawn's ship, the Chimera, and reaching in through the bridge and restraining him with their tentacles. And this harkens back to the Bendu's prediction about Thrawn's demise. He saw his defeat like many arms closing in around him. John, I gotta tell you, those many arms, they were tentacles.
No way.
Yeah. Big space whale tentacles.
That's like the Bendu knew.
It's like the Bendu knew, yes, indeed. That was just a fun sentence to say.
So the Purgle wrap themselves around the Chimera and begin to power up to do their space. Why am I okay with space whales being able to jump into hyperspace, but wolves being able to do it is a little bit too far for me? I don't know. Maybe it's because they're space whales. But Hera on comms with Ezra is almost pleading with him to get off the ship.
Right.
And understandably, she doesn't want to lose any more of her team. Ezra says that he has to do this 'cause he's restraining Thrawn. He's holding a door full of stormtroopers, and there's just not enough time for him to get off.
Right. Which I didn't pick up on. You had to kind of... I was like, well, why doesn't he just leave? And the door full of stormtroopers, that would be a problem.
Yes. The Purgle power up and just take off. And we're left with the Phoenix Squad and their new friends, or not their old friends, just kind of staring into the sky, not really knowing what to do.
And, that's how I kind of felt about that ending for Rebels. It was a good ending, and we get a little bit more sort of wrap-up, epilogue type stuff, but I was kind of left standing there staring at the TV going, huh,
Spurgle.
Well, that happened.
Some space whales.
It was certainly an interesting ending. We get a little bit of epilogue stuff.
Well, to wrap that up real quick, they get the Imperial base, which is a ship,
right,
to take off, flies out over the ocean,
explodes.
After the rebels are able to get off the ship.
Just the rebels.
Yeah, just the rebels. So all the Imperial forces were just kind of murdered, which
awkward.
Is their MO. They like to kill loyal Imperial citizens. Imperial
jackbooted thugs.
Yeah. No. Yeah. Yeah, but we do get a big explosion and the people of Lothal celebrating, and one of the Imperial, I think it was one of the factories or the academies, their blast doors open and some confused stormtroopers wander out and a crowd of Lothal citizens rush in pointing guns at them.
Well, I think it was just the one lady that was pointing a gun at them.
And you made a great comment on that.
Sir, I found this weapon.
Yeah.
I think it's an illegal weapon. I do not know how to hold this. I am a civilian. Please take it away from me.
But yeah, and the one thing that I thought was confusing of this whole sequence was after the Purgle, Captain Rex points out the Empire isn't going to let us just hold Lothal and we need to be prepared for an attack, which was the only thing I was thinking about the entire time this plan was going off. Was just because you shot a ship into space doesn't mean the Empire's gone. But it works.
Yeah,
they never came back.
And the only thing that I can think of is that this entire event must have taken place. We'll have to check the timeline, but it must have taken place like right before the events of A New Hope, to the point of like the Empire has other problems to deal with the United Rebel faction.
If I remember right, Rebels was stated to have started 5 years before A New Hope.
Yes.
So 4 seasons, we can roughly translate 4 years.
There was a time skip.
That's true. I'm thinking it's probably closer to Rogue One.
Right. Well, and Rogue One happens 10 minutes before A New Hope, so,
yeah.
Not ends 10 minutes before A New Hope. So we see... But an interesting thing about this epilogue sequence is that it jumps to after Return of the Jedi. We have a voiceover from Sabine kind of telling us where the whole Ghost crew and some of their B and C team members end up. Zeb ends up going with...
He takes Callus to the new Lasat homeworld.
Yeah. Which is a good wrap-up for them.
I like that the narrations that he was welcomed there, and I like that because they've mentioned many times that it's almost a warrior culture,
right?
And when he fought the Lasat with the honor guard weapon he has, he won it.
Call it the Lasat stick.
Yeah, he won it in what would be considered honorable combat. It wasn't a trophy, it was something that he took with honor. Right. So I think he truly had a respect for the Lasat people. So for him to be able to go back there and be welcomed, I thought was cool.
Yeah, I didn't think about it that way. That is pretty neat. We also get to hear a little bit about Rex and Hera, who fought at the Battle of Endor, which is pretty awesome. It ties into the whole Return of the Jedi thing, and it makes it so you can believe that Rex was in Return of the Jedi. It's left purposefully ambiguous, and I like that.
And I had to give you a disclaimer that the way it was worded was that Hera and Rex fought at the Battle of Endor.
Right.
Which was also the space battle, so I do like that they kind of left it vague that maybe he was just on the Ghost fighting in the fleet battles, or maybe he was the character that was formerly known as Nick Saint, and it's up to you to decide that, which I think is cool.
Yeah, I agree with that. Hera also has a son.
It's
who
true.
We're told is, you know who the father is? Basically, word for word, that's what they say. We know what his father was like. So, Kanan has a kid. Maybe that'll transfer into their new show that they're doing, which is apparently titled Resistance. So that would be a fun little connection, maybe, possibly.
I would also like to point out, I believe that this is only the second instance of interspecies breeding in Star Wars.
I believe you're correct.
And it's been with Twi'leks and humans.
Yeah.
The other, of course, being two children of a clone and a Twi'lek.
Back in Clone Wars.
Yep, back in Clone Wars.
So the very last bit of epilogue we get is a scene of Sabine meeting with a white-clad, staff-wielding Ahsoka Tano.
She looks like a priestess.
Yep. To go out and find Ezra. Which, at the end of the day, there were a couple characters that we had to explain their absence. Otherwise, it would be like, well, why isn't Ezra helping so-and-so do whatever in the original trilogy. So Ezra was one of them. Ahsoka was another one of them. Kanan, we already wrapped up nicely with his death. That sounded callous, but...
Hot callous.
Single strand of hair callous.
Hair all week.
And so I enjoy the fact that they wrapped up those storylines. They got them out of the picture enough. But honestly, that's what they brought Ahsoka back for? Just to go... I mean, Sabine could have done that by herself. They went through all this effort to bring back Ahsoka, and she didn't do anything in the finale. It wraps back up to my point where I think that her character arc would have been so much more meaningful if she would have died at the hands of Vader.
I would like to point out, though, that the last time we saw Snips, when Ezra and Snips were parting each other and the world between worlds, Ezra calls out to her to find him when she gets back, which I think was setting up the scene with Snips at the end of whatever the show was called again.
You mean the one that we've been talking about for a combined 2.5 hours?
Yeah, that one.
Star Wars Rebels, John. Star Wars Rebels. It's very late here.
I feel like it was a thing. It was setting up a new direction for some other media to go.
Sure.
I made a joke in my notes. A show title called Snips and Sabs: Adventures in Wild Space, a Star Wars story, which is something I would thoroughly enjoy, is watching a hot-headed Mandalorian and a hot-headed Snips just being hot-headed all over the galaxy.
Yeah, but Snips isn't the same as she was. She's all Force priestessy now.
But she could be. We don't know what she's hiding under that cloak. Some sass, I guess.
I was going to go with lightsabers.
Yeah, probably lightsabers. Before we recorded this, I was very adamant that you don't watch the Rebels Recon that came out.
Which
the last
I did
one
not.
After this. There are some great points in there. If you haven't watched it yet, if you have some questions, Dave himself answers a few more things that may not have been apparent. But one of the things he believes that Ezra and Thrawn are still alive somewhere.
I'm fine with this.
And I've been fine with that too. Ian and I had many discussions, you and I, about what we'd want to see with those two. The thing that I've always championed was Thrawn seeing the value in Ezra as an asset and having him join his crusade about whatever is going on in the unknown regions that he's worried about. And it looks like that's kind of what's happening, just not on Thrawn's terms.
It would be kind of cool to see a Thrawn Ezra team up with Eli, the other guy he took, his protege from the Thrawn book.
Yeah.
Just forming a Chiss homeworld defense force against whatever's coming. It's just a problem that the rest of the galaxy is not at all in tune with whatsoever, and they're just able to go out and deal with it while the whole First Order is rising, and that's kind of cool. That sets up, that could potentially set up what we've been hearing, is that we're going to have adventures in a entirely new sector of the galaxy going forward. Maybe that's one of them. Maybe it isn't.
And one other thing they set up this season was what's going on Mandalore. So I think the show gives off 3 possible plot lines that can be taken over with the next incarnation, whether it be a live action or another animated or a standalone film if they're still making those.
People like Mandalore.
They do. I've seen them walking around in their armor.
Pretty rad armor. Well, this has been a huge episode of Hoth Topics, a Star Wars podcast. John, thank you for sticking through it with me.
Ian, you have strong opinions.
I do. I really do. But you know who else has strong opinions? Our listeners. And we want to hear them. We want to thank you for joining us for another episode of Hoth Topics. If you have strong opinions and want to tell me that mine are wrong, or agree with me, probably tell me that I'm wrong, go ahead and send us an email at hothpod@gmail.com. That's hothpod@gmail.com. We're going to move away from the Rebels discussion going forward. We've spent a lot of time on it. It was a lot of fun. but I want to get into some other topics going forward. And if you have an idea for a topic, that's a great thing to send in an email. What do you think, John?
I like that idea.
It's a great idea.
You can't expect us to come up with all the great ideas.
Correct. We want to hear from you. Thank you very much. I've been Ian.
I've been craving some Cactus Cooler.
That's John. Send him Cactus Cooler. Thanks, everybody. We'll see you next time on another episode of Hoth Topics, a Star Wars podcast.